When I was an undergraduate at Missouri State, I used to sneak down into Meyer Library and sit in the back. I was gender studies minor, psychology major, and I would read these old cookbooks that they had because they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these old cookbooking and homemaking books. Now, this was a particular genre for a very long time. They still exist, but they're a different thing now than they were 100 years ago. There were these books about how to manage a home, and they contained everything. There were specific books of etiquette and specific books of cooking and cooking for certain events and all of those things, but also there were just these like beginner's guide to running a home. Essentially, the very first of these books was called Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, and it was a book that contained everything: how to hire staff, how to run a household, timing, management, budgetary, everything in one place for the first time. Her husband was a kind of bookmaker, and he was the guy who was the first to publish Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in Great Britain, and she agreed that she would write a book about how to manage a home. Right at the cusp of the time where like the middle class is starting to become something in Victorian England, right? Up until this moment, essentially you either ran a very fancy house or you were making do. Suddenly there's this middle class coming up. Mrs. Beeton's book is part of that. This new era of women in Victorian England that wished that they were like running a house but couldn't quite get there. And it was also the first book that involved a lot of cooking recipes that involved a very standardized way of presenting them. She got a lot of flack because she was actually just kind of plagiarizing recipes from here or there. They didn't have a real system in place yet of how to like acknowledge where these recipes were coming from. But she was putting them out in a very consistent way for the very first time. And the thing about Mrs. Beeton's book that I always found the most interesting is that the very first page of the very beginning, she says, "I would not have done this book if I had understood how much effort it was going to take me. I must frankly own that if I had known the labor which this book has entailed, I should never have been courageous enough to commence it." And in fact, she's still running a household while she's doing this book. She's still having kids. And she dies 4 years after the publication of the first edition because of an infection because of the birth of her fourth child. So she is doing all the things in the middle of it and trying to communicate it. In the production of this book, she creates essentially the first how to do homemaking book that becomes kind of the guiding light, the beginning of this idea that you can learn these skills via a book once you're already doing the work.